Where's Oakley, the child who disappeared without a trace? Stay tuned here at our channel handle at Mystery Vault 80. Some mysteries begin with silence. And in the small town of Oakville, Washington, silence is all that remains. Her name was Oakley Carlson, a little girl whose laughter once filled her home, whose drawings still sit unfinished, and whose story still echoes in the shadows of unanswered questions. One day, Oakley vanished. No alarm, no search party that morning. Just a quiet absence that grew into one of the most haunting, unsolved mysteries in America. What really happened to Oakley? Did she wander off into the forest? Was there something more sinister behind those smiling family photos? No one knows for sure, and maybe that's what makes this case so haunting. In this documentary, we'll step into the strange silence surrounding Oakley's disappearance, exploring the clues, the contradictions, and a mystery that refuses to fade. But before we begin, take a moment to make a difference. Hit subscribe and join our community here at Mystery Vault 80, where we uncover the world's most chilling mysteries, one truth at a time. Like, comment, and share this story, not just for views, but because sometimes the smallest voice can echo the loudest when enough of us are listening. Write #FindOakley in the comments below, a symbol that you're part of the light still searching through this darkness. As we begin, let's return to the last place she was ever seen. A quiet home in Washington, where one little girl and all the answers vanished into thin air. The girl who vanished without a trace. In the quiet town of McCleary, Washington, nestled between tall evergreens and winding roads, a little girl once laughed, played, and lit up her small world with joy. Her name was Oakley Carlson, born on December 6, 2016. For the people who knew her, Oakley wasn't just another child. She was energy in motion, wild, free, curious. A spark in the rain-soaked stillness of rural Washington. But behind the smiles and sunshine photos, something darker was brewing. A story of neglect, secrets, and a system that failed to protect her. Because one day, Oakley Carlson simply vanished. No Amber Alert, no witness, no clear explanation. And when investigators started asking questions, the answers they received were stranger and colder than anyone could imagine. This isn't just the story of a missing child. It's a mirror into how silence, denial, and broken systems can make someone disappear. Not into the wilderness, but into thin air. Tonight, we reopen the mystery of Oakley Carlson, the little girl who was last seen alive in 2021, and whose disappearance continues to haunt both investigators and the people of Washington State. Who failed her? Where is she? And how could this happen again? If you believe every missing child deserves to be remembered, hit the like button, share this story, and subscribe to help us uncover the truth behind the tragedy that Washington can't forget. The beginning, a life between two worlds. Before she became the face on missing posters, before the world knew her name, there was just Oakley, a little girl learning to walk, to talk, to trust. Born in 2016, Oakley Carlson came into a world that was already unstable. Her parents, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson, were struggling with addiction, with instability, with responsibility. From the very start, Oakley's world was one of chaos and uncertainty. When she was just 7 months old, Oakley and her siblings were removed from their parents' care by Washington State Child Protective Services, CPS. It was a moment that, in hindsight, may have been both the beginning of her safety and the beginning of her tragedy. For the next 2 years, Oakley was placed in foster care with Jamie Jo and Eric Hiles, a couple from Elma, Washington. By every account, Oakley thrived. Jamie Jo often described her as vibrant, sweet, and full of life. The Hiles family loved her as their own. In their care, Oakley learned what stability felt like: structure, safety, bedtime stories. But in 2019, everything changed. Despite warnings from caseworkers and growing concern about her parents' readiness, the state decided to reunite Oakley with Jordan and Andrew, her biological parents. The decision was based on a belief that families should be kept together whenever possible. But for Oakley, that belief would prove devastating. The reunification process was rushed. Reports suggested minimal follow-up visits, inconsistent welfare checks, and troubling signs ignored. By late 2019, Oakley was gone from the Hiles home. Jamie Jo remembered watching the little girl she called my daughter being taken away, believing she'd never see her again, and praying she'd be safe. But as the months passed, the Hiles family couldn't shake a feeling that something wasn't right. No photos, no updates, and whenever they asked how Oakley was doing, CPS told them everything was fine. In truth, Oakley had vanished long before anyone realized, because by late 2021, when authorities finally began to look for her, no one could say when she was last seen alive. The system meant to protect her had closed her case file, and in doing so, it may have sealed her fate. As one door closed, another one opened, into a darkness that no one was watching. The vanishing. When did Oakley disappear? By late 2021, Oakley Carlson was 4 years old. But what's most disturbing is this. By the time authorities began asking questions about her, she might have already been missing for months, maybe even longer. There were no public pleas for help, no missing person posters, no Amber Alert, just silence. And it all began with something that wasn't even about Oakley. Studio microphone, the discovery that wasn't meant to happen. In November 2021, a local school principal visited the Carlson family home to check on one of Oakley's siblings. During that visit, the principal noticed something strange. Oakley, who was always known to be around her brothers and sisters, was nowhere to be seen. When asked, Oakley's older sister said words that would chill anyone who heard them. Oakley is no more. The principal pressed for clarity, confused. Jordan Bowers, Oakley's mother, brushed it off, claiming Oakley was staying with friends or was being taken care of elsewhere. But nothing about her story added up. Within days, those inconsistencies reached Child Protective Services and local law enforcement. And on December 6, 2021, Oakley's 5th birthday, the investigation into her disappearance officially began. The 911 call and the house search. When deputies arrived at the Carlson home in Oakville, Washington, they were met with locked doors, evasion, and denial. Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson insisted Oakley was fine, but couldn't say where she was. Inside, the home was described as filthy, chaotic, and unsafe for children. Officers noted signs of neglect, possible drug use, and severe emotional distress among the other siblings. Yet still, no sign of Oakley. No bed prepared for her. No recent photos. No clothes in her size. It was as if she had been erased. The timeline that doesn't exist. Investigators tried to construct a timeline. When was Oakley last seen alive? Neighbors recalled seeing her playing outside sometime in February 2021. Others thought maybe earlier, but no one could be sure. Her parents gave conflicting stories and refused to cooperate. Their phones were seized. Their home was searched multiple times. Each time, police came away with the same chilling realization. There was no trace of Oakley, no body, no clear evidence of foul play, just a void. The case grew stranger. Jordan and Andrew were arrested, but not for Oakley's disappearance. Instead, they were charged with child endangerment for failing to give necessary medication to another child. Even in custody, they offered no explanation, no confession, no emotion. Each time investigators asked about Oakley's whereabouts, they were met with silence. The horror of realization. It was then that the community and the nation began to grasp the horror of this case. A 5-year-old girl could vanish from her own home, and months could pass before anyone noticed. There were no emergency alerts, no active search until it was already too late. Because officially, no one had reported her missing. To this day, no one knows the exact date Oakley disappeared. Some say February 2021. Others believe she may have been gone even earlier. What we do know is that for nearly 10 months, the system that was supposed to protect her never checked in. Not once. Somewhere in the quiet woods of Washington. Somewhere in the silence of that home. The truth about Oakley's disappearance remains buried. And every minute that passed before anyone looked for her was another minute stolen from justice. The parents, secrets, lies, and silence. When investigators began searching for Oakley Carlson, one truth emerged immediately. The key to her disappearance lay with two people, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson, her biological parents. Both were already known to authorities. Both had a history that raised red flags long before Oakley went missing, and both refused to tell the truth. A troubled past. Jordan Bowers had a record of instability, arrests, drug addiction, and erratic behavior that had once led to her children being removed from her care. Andrew Carlson, a former corrections officer, wasn't innocent either. While he maintained a calm public appearance, reports suggest he was deeply entangled in the same cycle of chaos and neglect. Together, they created a home that wasn't safe. Yet, somehow, Oakley and her siblings were returned to that environment after spending years with foster parents who adored her, a decision that would later spark outrage across Washington state. The return that should never have happened. In 2019, Oakley was placed in foster care with a loving family, the Hiles. Under their care, she thrived. She laughed, smiled, and grew strong. But after just 2 years, in February 2021, the state decided to return Oakley to her biological parents. Social workers noted improvements in Jordan and Andrew's behavior. They had completed some classes, passed drug tests, and seemed stable enough on paper. But reality told a different story. Behind closed doors, reports suggest the chaos resumed almost immediately. The couple kept to themselves, cut off contact with neighbors, and refused to let people see Oakley. By late 2021, no one outside that home could say for sure that Oakley was still alive. The silence of two parents. When police first questioned Jordan and Andrew, their stories didn't align. Jordan claimed Oakley was staying with friends. Andrew said she was visiting relatives. Both statements were false. Each time investigators pressed harder, both parents grew defensive, evasive, even hostile. They refused polygraphs. They refused interviews. And even when arrested on child endangerment charges, they spoke not one word about Oakley. To this day, neither has provided any detail about her disappearance. Inside the investigation room, detectives describe those interrogations as some of the most frustrating moments of their careers. Every lead led back to the same cold wall of silence. Where is Oakley? Why did no one see her for months? What happened inside that house? No answers. No remorse, no trace of emotion, just the same chilling emptiness. The psychological puzzle. For investigators, Jordan and Andrew became a psychological riddle. Jordan, often manipulative and combative, displayed signs of narcissism and denial. Andrew, more reserved, appeared broken, caught between guilt and fear. Some experts believe he knows the truth, but is too afraid or ashamed to speak. Others think both parents are complicit in hiding what really happened to their daughter. The legal maze. While public outrage grew, prosecutors faced a major problem. Without a body or clear evidence of a crime, they couldn't charge the couple with homicide or abuse directly related to Oakley. So instead, they pursued secondary charges, neglect, child endangerment, and drug violations. Jordan Bowers received multiple prison sentences on unrelated counts. Andrew Carlson, too, faced jail time but was released earlier than expected. Still, no confession, no cooperation. It's a haunting reality. Two parents sitting in jail, knowing where their daughter is, and choosing to say nothing. Every investigator who's worked the case believes one thing. Oakley didn't just vanish. Someone made her disappear. If love could speak, Oakley's voice would echo through the silence of her parents' lies. But truth, like her, remains hidden. And as each year passes, the world grows more desperate to hear the one thing Jordan and Andrew refuse to say. Where is Oakley Carlson? The foster family, the ones who never gave up. Before Oakley Carlson became the face on missing posters. Before her name turned into a plea for justice. There was a time when she was safe, happy, and deeply loved. That time was when she lived with Jamie Jo and Eric Hiles, her foster parents, the people who would later become the heart of this story. A home filled with light. When Oakley first arrived at the Hiles home in 2019, she was a quiet, timid little girl. Her eyes spoke of confusion, the kind that only children from chaotic homes understand. But within weeks, everything began to change. Jamie Jo, a teacher and mother, made it her mission to bring light back into Oakley's life. She taught her how to read bedtime stories, how to sing silly songs, and how to laugh without fear. Eric, calm and patient, built forts with her in the living room and taught her to ride a small pink tricycle in the backyard. For the first time, Oakley was part of a family that saw her, really saw her. The love that wasn't enough. But in foster care, love isn't always enough. The system, bound by policy and paperwork, believed in one core principle: reunification. The goal was always to send Oakley back to her biological parents, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson, once they proved they could provide a stable home. Jamie Jo and Eric tried to trust the process. They attended meetings, followed every court order, and prayed that Oakley's parents had truly changed. Yet deep inside, both felt a growing fear, a quiet, uneasy feeling that wouldn't go away. She was finally safe here, Jamie Jo would later say, and I just knew something wasn't right. The system's decision. In February 2021, despite their concerns, the state decided to return Oakley to her biological parents. It was a moment the Hiles family would never forget. Oakley, now 4 years old, hugged Jamie Jo tightly, refusing to let go. There were tears, confusion, and promises whispered through sobs. Promises that she'd come visit, that she'd be okay, that she'd never be forgotten. But those visits never came. The silence after goodbye. Weeks turned into months, and the Hiles family heard nothing. Their messages went unanswered. Their calls went ignored. Even social workers couldn't reach Jordan or Andrew. Then came the silence. No photos, no videos, no sign that Oakley was even alive. Jamie Jo knew something was wrong. She reported her concerns to Child Protective Services again and again. But her warnings, like too many before them, disappeared into bureaucracy. The moment everything changed. Then, in December 2021, the call that changed everything came. A school official reported that Oakley's older sister had told a teacher something terrifying. There's no Oakley. She's gone. That moment broke the case wide open and shattered Jamie Jo's heart into a million pieces. The foster mother who had once tucked Oakley into bed was now faced with the horrifying reality that the little girl she loved might never come home. The foster mother's crusade. Jamie Jo and Eric didn't stop. They began speaking publicly to local news, to police, to anyone who would listen. Their message was simple. Oakley deserves to be found. She deserves to be seen. They created social media campaigns, attended court hearings, and pushed lawmakers to change Washington's child welfare system. Jamie Jo became the voice Oakley no longer had, and in doing so, inspired thousands across the world to demand accountability. It's often said that love leaves a mark, and even after Oakley's disappearance, the Hiles' love continues to echo through every plea, every tweet, every candlelit vigil. They couldn't save her then, but they may just be the reason justice finally finds her now. Jamie Jo once said, "If Oakley can hear me, I want her to know she's still ours." Those words became the soul of this story, a story of heartbreak, courage, and unending love. Because in every missing child case, there are two families, the one that failed them and the one that never stopped fighting. The investigation, clues, lies, and the vanishing trail. By December 2021, the question on everyone's lips was simple. Where is Oakley Carlson? But for investigators, the search for truth was anything but simple. What began as a welfare check quickly spiraled into one of the most frustrating and heartbreaking investigations in Washington state's history. The first break-in silence. When Grays Harbor County deputies first entered the Carlson home, what they saw was more than neglect. It was chaos. Piles of garbage, mold on the walls, children's toys buried under heaps of clothes. The home smelled of smoke and damp rot. But what shocked them most wasn't what they found. It was what they didn't. No sign of Oakley's clothes. No toothbrush. No toys that match her age. No recent photos anywhere. It was as if Oakley had been erased. Conflicting stories. When detectives questioned Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson, the parents gave a story that made no sense. They claimed Oakley was staying with friends, but couldn't give names, addresses, or even describe a location. When asked when they last saw her, both gave different dates. One said November, the other said a week ago. Neither could back it up. Investigators began to sense what every detective fears, that they weren't searching for a missing child, but for evidence of something much darker. The digital footprints. Detectives turned to technology. They checked the parents' phones, texts, and online accounts. But there were no recent photos of Oakley, not a single one since early 2021. Social media posts that once showed her smiling face had suddenly stopped. Bank records revealed no child-related expenses, no medical visits, no school enrollment, no daycare payments. It was as though Oakley had disappeared long before anyone realized it. The burned backyard. Then came the most disturbing discovery. Detectives noticed a burned pit in the backyard, blackened soil, ash, and remnants of melted objects. Neighbors later reported seeing Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson burning something large weeks before the investigation began. When asked, the parents claimed they were burning trash. Forensic specialists tested the site but couldn't confirm the presence of human remains. The evidence was too degraded. Still, the timing was impossible to ignore. The burned pit became a grim symbol, the possible end of a story no one wanted to believe. The sisters' words. And then came a voice, small, trembling, but powerful enough to shake an entire investigation. Oakley's 6-year-old sister was interviewed by detectives. When asked where her little sister was, she whispered, "Oakley's no more. Mommy and Daddy told me not to talk about it." Those words became the core of the case. Haunting, vague, but unmistakably real. The arrests, but not for murder. Authorities quickly arrested Jordan and Andrew, but not for Oakley's disappearance. Instead, they were charged with child endangerment and neglect, for failing to provide medication to another child. It was a frustrating blow for investigators and the community alike. There wasn't enough physical evidence to charge them with Oakley's death or abduction. The case, legally, was built on shadows. Still, even behind bars, both parents refused to speak. They offered no clues, no remorse, and no cooperation. Detectives' desperation. The Grays Harbor Sheriff's Office poured thousands of hours into the case. Hundreds of interviews. Searches through acres of forest, fields, and rivers. Volunteers, drones, cadaver dogs, all found nothing. It was as if Oakley had vanished in a thin air. Detectives compared this case to chasing smoke. Every time they thought they had a lead, it dissolved. Every tip turned to rumor. Every sighting led nowhere. The public's outrage. When the details became public, outrage swept across the country. How could a 5-year-old child disappear for months without a single official noticing? The answer lay in a system overwhelmed by bureaucracy, one that prioritized paperwork over people. Oakley's foster mother, Jamie Jo Hiles, called it a failure of humanity. She became the face of public advocacy, demanding reform and accountability. Every missing child case leaves behind questions. But Oakley's disappearance left behind something even heavier: silence. A silence that stretched from the courtroom to the forests of Washington. A silence broken only by the voices of those who refused to forget her name. The parents, lies, control, and the secrets they tried to bury. In every mystery, there comes a point where the shadows lead back to one place, to the people closest to the victim. In Oakley Carlson's story, those shadows always pointed to her parents, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson. On the surface, they were simply two struggling adults trying to rebuild their lives. But behind that fragile image was a dark history of addiction, manipulation, and denial. The rebuilding that never was. Jordan and Andrew's relationship had always been turbulent. Both had battled drug addiction and instability long before Oakley was born. Their home had been flagged multiple times by Child Protective Services, CPS, for unsafe conditions and neglect. When Oakley and her siblings were taken into state care, social workers hoped that separation might be a turning point. And for a while it seemed to be. Andrew reportedly maintained steady employment at a local corrections facility. Jordan attended rehabilitation programs and completed mandatory parenting courses. To the system, they appeared rehabilitated. But beneath the paperwork and promises, their old habits never left. The faces they showed the world. When CPS reviewed their progress, the couple seemed cooperative. They smiled during visits, told social workers what they wanted to hear, and played the part of loving parents. But neighbors would later describe something entirely different. A home where the children were often left alone, where shouting echoed through the night, and where the parents' moods swung from affection to aggression within minutes. It was a world of contradictions. Love one moment, chaos the next. The control. Jordan Bowers was described by those who knew her as domineering, secretive, and unpredictable. She controlled what the children said, what they did, and who they could talk to. When questioned by social workers, her answers were short, vague, and often ended in hostility. Andrew Carlson, on the other hand, was quieter, a man who often appeared submissive, following Jordan's lead. To investigators, it was a disturbing dynamic. A mother who ruled through fear, and a father who enabled her silence. The gaps in their story. When Oakley disappeared, Jordan and Andrew's behavior became even more erratic. They moved inconsistently, stopped communicating with relatives, and avoided any contact with CPS. When investigators pressed them, they gave vague excuses. She's with friends. She's staying somewhere safe. We don't want to talk about it. But none of those stories held up. Police found no friends, no babysitters, no relatives who had seen Oakley since early 2021. Phone records placed both parents at home during that time. Yet still, they refused to admit anything. The arrests. When law enforcement finally arrested Jordan and Andrew, they expected, maybe even hoped, that the parents would finally talk. But instead, the two turned on each other. Jordan refused to answer any questions about Oakley's disappearance. Andrew gave vague, contradicting statements, then stopped cooperating altogether. Neither of them ever reported Oakley missing. Not once. Their silence became their shield, and investigators could do nothing but watch the clock tick as evidence faded with time. The pattern of lies. Even after being jailed for child endangerment, the lies didn't stop. Jordan began creating false accounts online, posting cryptic messages about haters and lies. Andrew attempted to present himself as a remorseful father, but always stopped short of real accountability. Behind bars, their manipulative behavior continued. Letters, indirect threats, refusals to cooperate. And yet, no confession. Psychological breakdown. Experts have described their behavior as narcissistic and defensive, the kind typical of abusers who refuse to acknowledge harm. According to court psychologists, Jordan displayed traits of paranoid delusion and control-seeking behavior. Andrew's compliance, meanwhile, fit the profile of codependent submission, a man too weak to stop what he knew was wrong. To the outside world, they were parents. But to those who looked deeper, they were a partnership of silence, bound together not by love, but by secrets. Every time a question about Oakley's fate is raised, it meets the same wall of denial, the same hollow words, the same unbearable silence. And in that silence, investigators and the public are left to wonder if the people who should have protected her were the ones who destroyed her chance to live. Sometimes, the most terrifying monsters don't hide in the dark. They sit in plain sight, smiling for the camera, pretending everything is fine. But the truth always leaks through the cracks. The evidence, digital trails, burned secrets, and the search for truth. In the world of true crime, silence can sometimes speak louder than words. And in Oakley Carlson's case, silence became the loudest evidence of all. As investigators pieced through every corner of her parents' lives, they discovered that the truth wasn't hidden in plain sight. It was buried in digital trails, burned remains, and contradictions that painted a chilling picture. The digital forensics. Detectives began by examining the Carlsons' phones, laptops, and internet histories. What they found was telling. Months of no photographs or videos of Oakley. deleted message threads, and social media posts. Sudden gaps in communication beginning around February 2021, the same period Oakley was last seen by neighbors. But the real clue wasn't what they found. It was what wasn't there. There were no Google searches about schools, pediatric checkups, or child supplies. No records of any doctor visits. No sign Oakley had existed in their lives for nearly a year. It was digital silence, deliberate and haunting. The burned backyard. Then came the most disturbing discovery. When forensic teams searched the Carlson home, they noticed a charred burn pit behind the property. The soil was dark, scattered with melted debris, metal fragments, fabric, and plastic remnants that looked like the remains of children's toys. Neighbors later told investigators they'd seen smoke rising for hours from that very spot, weeks before police arrived. Jordan Bowers had explained it away. "We were just burning trash." But detectives didn't believe her. Forensic testing of the ashes revealed traces of synthetic material and bone-like fragments, though too degraded to conclusively identify. Still, to everyone involved, it felt like more than coincidence. The vanishing photos. Investigators also uncovered a pattern in the Carlsons' digital lives. Both parents' phones showed deleted photo caches and factory resets performed months apart. Digital experts determined the wipes were intentional, done to erase images, messages, and possibly videos related to Oakley. One detective later said in an interview, "You don't delete your child's pictures unless you're trying to erase your child's existence." The neighbor's witness. Multiple neighbors came forward with chilling statements. They claimed that sometime in February 2021, they saw Jordan Bowers running outside during a small fire incident near the backyard. The parents refused to let anyone help. After that day, Oakley was never seen again. Later, when investigators asked those same neighbors when they last saw Oakley alive, no one could give a date. It was as if the little girl had faded away into memory, her absence explained by lies that no one thought to question. The messages between lies. Text message records revealed the emotional distance between Jordan and Andrew. There were messages about money, anger, and complaints about CPS, but none about Oakley. Even during holidays or birthdays, there was no mention of her name, no acknowledgement that she existed. That absence became its own kind of evidence. Not proof of death, but proof of neglect, indifference, and erasure. The search that found nothing. Despite their efforts, search teams, including K-9 units, drones, and volunteer groups, found no physical trace of Oakley in miles of surrounding forest and rivers. The woods behind the Carlson home were combed repeatedly. Creeks, abandoned wells, and even nearby landfills were examined. Nothing. Investigators began to suspect that evidence had been destroyed long before the first search ever began. The psychological evidence. Police psychologists reviewed both parents' interviews and determined that their emotional responses were inconsistent. Jordan displayed anger and avoidance. Andrew appeared anxious, submissive, and detached. They didn't show grief, they showed control, even in the face of missing child charges. Both refused to utter Oakley's name in front of investigators. For many, that silence was damning enough. The emotional evidence. As the investigation deepened, the community began to take on its own role, organizing vigils, building memorials, and raising funds to help search efforts. Posters of Oakley appeared in schools, grocery stores, and car windows across Washington state. And at every event, one question echoed through the crowd. How could this happen? Because while detectives hunted for forensic proof, the people who loved Oakley were left with the emotional truth that a little girl had been failed by every system meant to protect her. Evidence isn't always found in ashes or fingerprints. Sometimes it's written in silence, in the things people never say, and in the lives they try to erase. The truth about what happened to Oakley Carlson still lies somewhere between those silences, hidden behind deleted files, lost memories, and the smoke that once rose from her family's backyard. The system that failed, bureaucracy, blind spots, and missed warnings. When a child disappears, we expect answers. We expect the system, child welfare agencies, schools, social workers, to see the signs and act. But in Oakley Carlson's case, the system didn't just fail. It looked away. The system that gave Oakley back. Before she vanished, Oakley had once been safe. For nearly 3 years, she lived with a loving foster family, a couple who cared for her, took her to school, and ensured she was healthy. They described her as bright, curious, and full of laughter. Under their roof, Oakley thrived. But in 2019, despite numerous reports of instability and substance abuse from her biological parents, the Washington State Department of Children, Youth and Families, DCYF, made a controversial decision. They returned Oakley to her biological parents, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson. It was supposed to be a story of reunification, a triumph of family restoration. Instead, it became a tragic blueprint for systemic collapse. Ignored warnings. The foster family had raised concerns. So did Oakley's school teachers and neighbors. Reports mentioned erratic behavior from Jordan, frequent absences, and signs of neglect. There were even rumors of drug use resurfacing. But each time a report came in, it was either closed, under-investigated, or marked as resolved. A former DCYF employee later admitted, "We were overloaded. Cases like Oakley slip through when the system is stretched thin. Those slips became fatal. The bureaucratic blind spot. When agencies deal with hundreds of cases, they rely on checklists, risk assessments, home visit forms, progress notes. But paperwork doesn't measure danger. In Oakley's case, those forms painted a picture of moderate improvement and stable home environment. But that was only on paper. No one saw the real home, a place filled with chaos, drugs, and neglect. The last documented welfare check on Oakley was in early 2020. After that, nothing. No visits, no calls, no follow-ups. Oakley simply disappeared from the system's radar. The missing pieces. When detectives began investigating her disappearance, they found shocking gaps in records. No updated medical files. No school registration forms. No caseworker notes after 2020. It was as if Oakley had been erased, not only from her home, but from every system meant to protect her. And perhaps the most haunting part, when authorities tried to determine when Oakley was last seen by a state official, they couldn't find a single confirmed record. The foster family's outcry. Oakley's former foster mother, Jamie Jo Hiles, refused to stay silent. She became the voice that the little girl no longer had. Jamie Jo began speaking publicly on social media, local news, and at rallies, demanding answers, accountability, and reform. She said, "We begged them not to send her back. We told them she wasn't safe, and they didn't listen." Her words cut deep because they exposed what so many already knew, that the system often favors reunification over safety, even when the warning signs scream otherwise. The school that tried to raise the alarm. A teacher later testified that she had noticed Oakley's older sister saying strange things. The child mentioned that Oakley isn't here anymore and that mom and dad told us not to talk about her. That chilling confession finally pushed school staff to call authorities, triggering the missing person report that launched the investigation. But by then it was too late. Months, maybe a year, had already passed since Oakley was last seen alive. When systems protect themselves. In the aftermath, DCYF issued a short statement expressing sympathy and cooperation with ongoing investigations. But internally, sources revealed a pattern of self-protection. Bureaucratic layers shielding the agency from public backlash. Reports were quietly edited, timelines blurred, and internal emails discussed narrative management. This wasn't just a failure of oversight. It was a failure of responsibility. The cultural problem. Experts say Oakley's case exposes a deeper issue. A system designed to preserve family unity at all costs, even when that cost is a child's life. Reunification, in theory, is noble. But without accountability and long-term monitoring, it becomes a gamble with children's safety. And Oakley became another tragic statistic in that cycle. A system under scrutiny. After Oakley's case made headlines, lawmakers in Washington state began calling for Oakley's Law. The proposed legislation aims to increase follow-up visits and strengthen accountability for children returned to biological parents. But as of now, many of those reforms are still pending, and other children remain in similar risk, unseen, unheard, and unprotected. Oakley Carlson's disappearance didn't just reveal the darkness inside one family. It revealed the cracks in the walls built to protect children like her. When systems fail, it's not because they don't care. It's because they forget what caring truly means. For every Oakley, there's a warning we can't afford to ignore again. The aftermath, the parents, the public, and the pursuit of justice. When Oakley Carlson's disappearance finally hit the public eye in late 2021, it was already too late. She'd been missing for months, perhaps even a year. And as the search began, one question echoed louder than all others. How could her parents not report her missing? On December 6, 2021, police arrived at the family's home in Oakville, Washington. It was an ordinary house, peeling paint, broken toys in the yard, blinds shut tight. But what officers found inside was anything but ordinary. Oakley was nowhere to be found. Her siblings were there, thin, scared, quiet. And the home? A wreck of filth, disarray, and neglect. Authorities quickly arrested Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson, not for murder, not yet, but for child endangerment and failure to report a missing child. Their interviews with investigators were contradictory, disjointed, and filled with evasions. Both parents denied knowing what had happened to Oakley. They claimed she was with family, or safe, or somewhere else. But as detectives dug deeper, the truth became murkier and far more disturbing. The parents' stories fall apart. Investigators noted something chilling. Neither parent had shown any urgency about their missing daughter. Jordan Bowers, the mother, appeared cold and detached, even defensive. She refused to answer direct questions. Andrew Carlson, on the other hand, broke more easily under pressure. But his answers kept changing. She's staying with a friend. We sent her to live somewhere else. She's fine. None of it made sense. And when detectives pressed harder, the cracks began to widen. Digital forensics showed no calls, no messages, no photos of Oakley after early 2021. The timeline was evaporating. The last verified sighting came from a neighbor in February 2021. After that, Oakley simply disappeared. The lies unravel. Neighbors later told police they hadn't seen Oakley in months. When they asked about her, the parents gave vague excuses. She's visiting her grandparents, or she's sick. But behind those lies, there were signs of something much darker. Authorities discovered burn marks in the backyard, and forensic teams collected ash samples, fearing the unthinkable. Though no human remains were ever confirmed, those findings added to a growing suspicion that Oakley's disappearance was not an accident. The wall of silence. What struck investigators most was the wall of silence around the family. Jordan Bowers reportedly told her other children not to talk about Oakley, even forbidding them to say her name. When one of Oakley's siblings was interviewed by police, they said something that sent chills down every spine in the room. Oakley is gone. Mom and Dad told me not to talk about her. That simple, heartbreaking statement became the foundation of the entire investigation. Public outrage erupts. Once news broke, public outrage exploded across Washington state and the U.S. People couldn't comprehend how a 5-year-old could vanish for months, without a single welfare check, report, or alert. Protests formed outside Grays Harbor County offices. Social media campaigns used hashtags like hashtag Justice for Oakley, hashtag Where is Oakley, and hashtag Oakley's Law. Communities demanded reform. Not only justice for Oakley, but accountability for the agencies that failed her. The story spread nationwide, with major outlets covering it as another tragic case of systemic neglect in child welfare programs. The legal battle. As investigators built their case, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson faced multiple charges, but not directly for Oakley's disappearance. They were charged with child endangerment, drug possession, and obstruction of justice. Both eventually received short prison sentences, but the charge everyone wanted, murder or manslaughter, never came. Why? Because without a body, prosecutors couldn't prove Oakley was dead. The lack of physical evidence created an agonizing limbo, a case that felt solved in the hearts of many, but open in the eyes of the law. The public's grief. Candlelight vigils appeared across the state. People who had never met Oakley gathered with candles, posters, and prayers. They read her favorite storybooks aloud. At one vigil, Jamie Jo Hiles, her former foster mother, said tearfully, "Oakley may be gone, but she will never be forgotten, and I will never stop fighting for her." Her words became a rallying cry, a mother's love transcending biology, fighting for justice in a system that had failed. The turning point. In the aftermath, something began to change. Lawmakers, advocates, and citizens began pushing for Oakley's law, a proposed legislation requiring better follow-ups for children reunited with biological parents. Though still under review, it symbolized a new chapter, not just in Oakley's memory, but in the fight for others like her. The case of Oakley Carlson remains one of heartbreak, failure, and unanswered questions. Her story reminds us that justice isn't always found in the courtroom. Sometimes, it's carried in the hearts of those who refuse to forget. Because for every child like Oakley, our silence is complicity and our action is her voice. The legacy. How Oakley's story changed everything. Some stories fade with time, but others, like Oakley Carlson's, leave marks too deep to forget. She wasn't just a missing child. She became the face of a broken system, the symbol of what happens when red flags go ignored. And even in her absence, Oakley's presence has changed lives, laws, and hearts across the nation. From tragedy to movement. When the news of Oakley's disappearance broke, the world didn't just grieve, it mobilized. Parents, teachers, social workers, and activists began asking the same question. How many other children have slipped through the cracks? Communities across Washington state united under one banner to ensure that what happened to Oakley never happens again. It wasn't just about her. It was about the countless unseen, unheard, and unprotected children still living in the shadows. The birth of Oakley's Law. Amid growing outrage, lawmakers introduced Oakley's Law, a proposed reform that would require frequent welfare checks after reunification, enforce mandatory reporting by educators and doctors for signs of neglect, create a public tracking system for children removed and rehomed by the state. The law became more than policy, it became a promise. Though still awaiting full implementation, its impact is already visible. Training programs for social workers, increased public awareness, and renewed scrutiny on every case that mirrors Oakley's. Changing the way we think about family. Oakley's story forced a painful conversation. Should blood always outweigh safety? For decades, child welfare systems have prioritized family reunification, often assuming that every biological parent can change. But Oakley's tragedy challenged that idea. Experts now argue that the focus must shift from family preservation to child protection. Her case has become a training example in seminars, colleges, and policy meetings nationwide. Each discussion carries her name, her face, and her story. She is teaching us even in her silence. The global ripple effect. Beyond Washington, Oakley's case reached international media. In the UK, Canada, and Australia, similar systems began reviewing their child return policies. Her disappearance reminded the world of a universal truth, that bureaucracy can't save lives if compassion is missing. She became not just a local story, but a symbol of vigilance. The foster mother who wouldn't stay silent. Through it all, Jamie Jo Hiles, Oakley's foster mother, remains her loudest advocate. Her social media updates, interviews, and public statements have kept Oakley's name alive. Long after the news cameras moved on, Jamie Jo turned her grief into activism. She began working with family services organizations, helping to support foster parents, and training new caregivers on recognizing red flags early. Her voice turned personal tragedy into collective purpose. Her pain into power. A case that changed policing. Law enforcement agencies, too, took lessons from Oakley's case. Departments across Washington began tightening response protocols for missing minors, ensuring no child's disappearance could go unreported for months again. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team has since incorporated Oakley's case into training simulations to teach investigators what early oversight looks like and how a quiet tragedy can become a nationwide failure. The power of memory. Years may pass, but the story of Oakley Carlson continues to echo. Her face appears on posters, murals, and digital billboards, a haunting reminder that justice isn't always about arrest or conviction. Sometimes it's about never letting go of the truth. Every anniversary of her disappearance brings renewed vigils. Candles flicker under a Washington sky. People whisper her name, and in that quiet, she lives again. We may never know what happened to Oakley Carlson, but we know what must happen next. The legacy of one little girl. In the end, Oakley's story became more than a case file. It became a mirror reflecting all the flaws, fears, and failures of society, and a call to do better. Every reform bill, every petition, every news feature carries the shadow of a child who should have been safe, who should have been loved, and who should still be here today. Oakley Carlson's name now stands as both a tragedy and a challenge. A tragedy for what was lost, a challenge to every one of us, to speak when others are silent, to care when others turn away, and to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. The silence that remains, truth, hope, and the haunting question, where is Oakley? B&D, direct hit true crime version at Dark Truth 25. For all the evidence uncovered, for every interview, every lead, and every unanswered question, one truth still pierces through the noise. Oakley Carlson is still missing. The investigation continues, even as the years stretch forward. The file remains open, marked active but cold. Detectives still comb through old data, hoping a single clue, a message, a sighting, a confession, might reopen the trail. But time has a way of erasing details, and the silence surrounding Oakley's fate grows heavier each passing day. The parents and the questions that never die. Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson, Oakley's biological parents, continue to live under public scrutiny. Despite their legal troubles, neither has been charged in direct connection with Oakley's disappearance. And that fact still haunts this case. Many ask, how could a child vanish after being returned home under state supervision? How could the system fail her again? Investigators believe the answers lie within that family home in Oakville, the place where the world last saw a smiling, innocent 5-year-old girl. And yet, without evidence, justice remains out of reach. Justice without closure. In cases like this, the hardest truth is that justice doesn't always arrive with handcuffs. Sometimes, it comes in the form of accountability, reform, and memory. Every person who speaks Oakley's name, every law passed in her honor, becomes part of her justice. Her story has exposed cracks in the system that have long been ignored. And because of her, new protocols, new voices, and new laws now stand guard where silence once ruled. Justice for Oakley isn't a slogan. It's a mission, still ongoing, still unfinished. The candle that never burns out. Across Washington state, people still gather on cold December nights. They light candles, hold signs, and whisper prayers, not just for Oakley, but for every missing child whose name has been forgotten. Those candles are not just memorials. They are reminders that we do not give up, because somewhere between truth and silence, there is still hope. A promise to Oakley. Narrator, final tone, emotional. Oakley, wherever you are, we hope you hear us. We hope you know you are missed, remembered, and loved by people who never met you. People who refuse to stop asking the one question that still echoes across every headline and every heart. Where is Oakley Carlson? On-screen text. If you have any information about the disappearance of Oakley Carlson, please contact the Grays Harbor County Sheriff's Office. There are stories that close neatly, with endings, answers, and justice. And then there are stories like Oakley Carlson's, where truth dissolves into silence, and silence becomes its own kind of mystery. She was last seen on a quiet rural road in Oakville, a place surrounded by trees that seemed to remember. And in that quiet, her story lives on, Half memory, half echo. The silence between facts. Detectives follow logic. Investigators trace evidence. But sometimes, the truth hides in spaces that data cannot touch. No footprints. No confirmed sightings. No sound, except the question that lingers like a ghost. What really happened to Oakley? Each theory feels like a shadow, reaching uncertain, vanishing just before the light touches it. The echo that never fades. And yet, she is not gone. Her presence moves through people, through laws, through memory. Each whisper of her name becomes part of something eternal. A quiet defiance against forgetting. The human spirit cannot let go of stories like this. Because in searching for her, we search for something deeper. Proof that innocence still matters. Proof that silence can still be broken. A universe of unanswered questions. There's a haunting beauty in mystery, not in the loss, but in the way it binds strangers together in pursuit of truth. Oakley's disappearance doesn't just ask, "Where is she?" It asks, "What kind of world lets this happen?" And maybe, in searching for her, we're also trying to find our own humanity again. The final reflection. Narrator, soft, fading. The forests of Washington still hold secrets. The wind still carries her name. And in every unanswered question, Oakley's story continues. Where is Oakley?